Welcome back. It is my pleasure to introduce Steve Fenn. Steve is going to be talking about outside-the-box formatting. By day, he is a Tableau solutions architect for Kforce, where he is usually lent out to clients for Tableau development and training. By night and lunch break, Steve he writes about sports, mostly soccer, from a quantitative perspective, with especially in finding the important trends in complex data, then presenting conclusions, usually through data visualization, in a widely accessible way. And I think that that's just awesome. So without further ado, let's turn it over to Steve.
Be good to unmute myself. Thank you very much. Now, for the introduction there, and welcome to Outside the Box Tableau formatting. Now, from what I've seen generally in my interactions with my clients, Tableau development in professional environments tends to stick a little too close to default Tableau formatting. It's not all that surprising because sometimes it's hard to get data people to think visually or to have visual folks understand and use data appropriately. And Tableau on its own is lovely. And in a lot of cases, that default formatting goes a long way. And this is more so the case in Tableau 10, the beta of which I'll be using today. They've done a nice job to spruce things up a bit. But you do need to make good choices in regards to color, sizing, fonts, annotations, etc. They'll make your work more attractive and easier to consume. Now, to illustrate those concepts more, today I'm going to show you how to create a somewhat complex chart in Tableau. Now, the saying, imitation is the highest form of flattery, is apt here, but it can also, another part of imitation is that it can serve as a means to expand your artistic thought. When I was in a playwriting class in college, one of the most effective teaching tools was to read a bunch of plays from authors that really knew what they were doing, and then trying to write something short in the same kind of way. And so in that way, what I'm trying to get across now is I'm going to recreate a expertly done chart that was created by 538, and you can kind of look at stuff from that website, from the Financial Times, Washington Post, New York Times. These are professional data visualization artists that really know what they're doing. And if you start to see certain things happening in their views, maybe you should consider trying to mimic those sorts of approaches in yours. So I forgot to share screen. Let me bring that up real quick. Okay. So the view that we're going to try to mimic is this one that was created by 538. Richie King, I believe, is the one who created this in the first place. And it is mapping out the evolving odds of penalty kicks in a shootout. Now, for those of you that don't follow soccer, or as Paul or others from the UK would say, football, well, really anyone outside of the U.S. would call it football. But if teams are tied at the end of a tournament match, then both teams send up 5 players, and they take turns shooting at the goal from 8 yards away, and the goalkeeper desperately tries to stop it and usually isn't able to. But you can see
I don't see your screen.
Oh, well, that would be an issue. Let me go back here. Do we see the screen now?
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, great.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so let me walk through that just one more time to outline what this chart is doing. So you've got 5 players from each team lining up, taking a kick, and then whether or not they are successful or miss the kick, or it's blocked by the keeper, then the odds evolve pretty dramatically in some cases. And then if they're tied after that, you get into a sudden death round, which keeps continuing until one makes it and one doesn't. So 538 put this out during the last World Cup. I think it's a really nice way to look at the evolution of those odds based on outcomes of each kick. But it is complex. I mean, in Tableau, you can do dual axes, and the approach I took was to use one axis to get the squares, one axis to get the lines, but then you're left trying to figure out how to get these extra bars in here. And the approach I'm going to take, which will be one of the last steps for those, is annotations. There's going to be a lot of annotation in this, and but let's get going. Now, in order to build this in Tableau at all, I first had to transcribe the data directly from the chart squares. So I just opened up Excel, started putting the numbers over here, and then I had to, by the way, if you've got my video up, I would recommend sticking that down in the corner here. That's going to be the area of the screen that is going to be, I'm going to go into the least often through the course of this. So I just transcribed the odds, the number of the kick, the margin of the lead, and the team in the lead at the time. And then I had to go a little more in depth in order to define these lines and use the path shelf in order to get that done. Now, my presentation here is much more about formatting. It's not about building the view itself. And honestly, the path shelf is worthy of its own full half-hour, 45-minute presentation on its own. So I'm going to tweet out the some links that are useful for certain sections of my talk that I'm not able to go into great detail on the fly. So if you follow me on @StatHunting, you'll now see a resource for the path shelf. But once I plug this into Tableau and put everything on the appropriate shelf, you end up with this view. And you can see it's kind of got the same shape as our view from 538 that we're trying to mimic, but there's definitely some issues that we need to solve right away. Now, first of all, the kick number, by default, when I had a continuous axis for kick number, Tableau reversed it and had 0 down at the bottom and 12 up at the top. So we just double click on the axis to bring up the Add Axis menu, choose reversed. While we're there, I worked out before this presentation that -0.5 to 13 is a pretty good approximation of the spacing of this view here. So we click apply. Get in the habit of clicking apply before you click OK on any of these menus. That way, if it doesn't do quite what you were expecting, you're already where you need to be to get it fixed. So now we click OK. And we've got this margin of lead, both running the squares and the lines. Always synchronize those if you're using the same measure to define different marks so they line up appropriately. And then I'm also going to double click on that axis and run it from -6 to +6. Again, more or less in keeping with the spacing of the original view. Oh, I also want to retitle this axis up here. And we're just going to call it, I'll just copy it over from my other screen real fast. So I've got the spacing right. Okay. The odds are showing up as decimals. We obviously need to change that since they should be percentages. So you right-click on odds of leading team winning. Choose default properties, number format. Always a good idea when you first start using a data source or if you build a calculated field that should be percentages. Make sure you're getting the default formatting in the way that is going to make sense. Now, we also need to get these colors of the lines to be the same as they are in the original view. So I'm going to double click on my color legend over here, double click on an individual. So we're changing the A make, and now I'm going to zoom in on the original view and use Tableau's lovely pick screen color feature, which unfortunately sometimes makes you do it twice. Not exactly sure why, but you get used to it. Or 3 times. That's unusual. There we go. And then you can save that for later use by just dragging it into one of those. I already did that for the gray and the red, so we won't go through those steps again quite as exhaustively. We change B make to red. We change miss to that gray. All right, now our lines are the way we want them. While we're here, let's also center our labels. So we go to the marks card of our squares, open up alignment, center on horizontal and vertical so that they're going to show up in the middle. It doesn't look quite right here because we don't quite have the space for it to look appropriate in the view screen. And that brings me to another main recommendation I'm going to make for formatting in Tableau, especially when it has to do with sizing and alignment. Do most of your formatting in the dashboard window, not the view window. So we're going to open up a dashboard now. And the orientation of this is a little different than it was in Tableau 9, but in Tableau 10, we've got our sizing of the dashboard right here, and we run from 575 to 1176, which are the dimensions of the original view. Zoom that view back to the way it was before so we see the whole thing. And now we're going to bring in our sheet. I'm going to do this as floating for a couple of reasons. One is that I'm going to float other objects on this dashboard. Also, let's get rid of those legends here. Just select them and click the X. One is that I'm going to float other objects, and when you publish floating objects, sometimes they move a couple pixels to the side, but they seem to all move the same amount, whereas tiled objects are a little more staid. So you're probably better off doing all tiled or all floating if possible. The other is that I don't want this axis to show up. If I were to right-click on it and deselect Show Header, though, I'd actually get rid of both axes because the bottom is the primary. So I'm just going to drag my view to be larger than the screen, and then that axis is off the screen. Okay. Now, we also need to build out the other aspects that are going to have to do with the sizing of things before we really start to tinker with the sizing of these boxes. That's why they're still so small here. So one of those is going to be to deselect Show Header on the Y-axis. It's not there in the original view. It doesn't really serve a purpose, so it's gone. The other is to resize the fonts of our axis up here. So we choose Format. Every time you want to change formatting of something in Tableau, just right-click and choose Format. And now from here, I'm going to make our overall title about 16 bold. I'll change the numbers here to be maybe 12 in bold. And now the tricky part. So our original view has got pluses on both sides and even listed in the middle. So none of these standard number formatting is going to get you that. And if you go plus hashtag, well, we're starting to get closer. But then the nice extra trick is if you go semicolon and then start typing something in, then you're formatting only the negatives, semicolon again, and type in even, and then you're formatting only the 0. And now we have basically this. And we'll have a trick at the end to get rid of the +4s to the +6s. I'm also going to bring in my title here. And I already worked out the font sizes for this previously, so I just pasted it in from my previous work. And that is the size I want. Oh, also, after I did that formatting of the axis, good to double check that the bottom axis is still off screen. It isn't. So now I need to go back, select my view, click on Layout, and we're going to increase the height of this view within the dashboard to 1250, and that'll take that extra axis back off screen. So now we get into the sizing of the squares. Now, if any Tableau devs are watching, if you could put this slider somewhere on the dashboard screen, that would be awesome. Because right now, I just have to slide it a bit. It's going to look real funky in the view screen. I go back to the dashboard, see if it's about right. Maybe I want it slightly larger than that. Okay, we're good. Okay, now, back to coloration. So at the moment, I've just got odds of leading team on a single color axis, but if we look in the original, we've got hues of blue for team A in the lead, hues of red for team B in the lead, and then a light gray that matches the background for the 50%. Well, my team in the lead field, in conjunction with this, would seem to be a great fit. And so one thing I could try to do is just drag that on the marks card and change it, that one to color, hopefully putting both in the same place. Problem is, Tableau won't let you put both a measure and a dimension on the color shelf at the same time. But there's a nice cheat. If I right-click on odds of leading team and choose create bins, I'm going to define these odds by bins of 10%, which incidentally, from what I can tell, seems to be what Richie King did when he created this for 538. There seem to be about 5 hues of each one of these running from 50% to 100%. And so once I have that, I can drag it below into the marks card, put it on the color shelf, and now I've got a concatenation of those two dimensions, even though this is really kind of a measure that I shoved into bins to get this to work, and we can color appropriate to that. Now, because of the sizing, now that we're in the view screen, I'm going to go back to the dashboard and bring that color legend onto screen so I actually see what I'm doing as we go here. If that was too fast, that was just from the context menu, legends, and then I chose the one that I knew was the correct legend I need to change. Now we double click here, and there's a short way and a long way to do this. I'm going to show you the short way, and then later on in the presentation, I'm going to do kind of a Food Network cheat of bringing something out of the oven that's taken the long way, that's a little more closer to what's going on here. But the nice and quick way is to select all of the Team B in a lead, choose a red palette and a sign palette. Your lightest hue is your first selection, your darkest hue is your last selection. Shift select the Team A in the lead, do the same thing for blue, assign palette, and that's pretty close to what we were seeing there. Oh, I seem to have gotten the alignment of those labels a little wrong. Let me get that. I'm going to correct that real quick. Oh, need to align them middle and center. Now we're good. And because the labels are totally covered by their boxes, they are going to be white or black based on the hue that's behind them. Okay. Now, as I said, I've got another version waiting in the oven where I took the longer approach. So on this color legend, I had gone and I had done the select color on screen for each of these individual combinations of team in the lead and percentage bin rather. The other cheat I did here is on our other one, you can't get different colors or different boldness on a title. So instead, I have brought in a text field that I hovered there and just format each of the individual parts the way that I want it to be. I've also done a lot of formatting here. And actually, let me go back to the original and show you the steps of that real fast. On this one, we had a lot of horizontal lines. Things weren't quite formatted the way we want. There's also borders here. Borders are something you don't see very often in professional data visualization. You see coming out from press organizations like 538 or New York Times. And so I tend to avoid them as well. I don't like having things on my dashboard, lines on my dashboard that don't really communicate anything. So I'm going to right click and choose format. And when you do that in white space, then you're taking care of formatting for everything within your view. So we go to borders, choose row divider to none, column divider to none, and now we don't have any borders anymore. We move over to lines, and here we're going to treat things differently for rows and columns. We don't have any horizontal lines outside of the notations I'll add in later. So I'm going to go to rows and get rid of grid lines, none. Also, we get rid of the 0 line here by choosing none. And under columns, we're going to choose a thin black 0 line, as we see just a little bit right there. And the grid lines are going to be dotted in a kind of lightish hue of gray. They'll be kind of thick. And voila. Okay, so back to the version coming out of the oven. So we've got things formatted here the way we want. I also emulated the header down here, and there were some sizing issues to take into account on this, but essentially I had a tiny little 538 Fox, whoops, wrong thing, 538 Fox, that got popped in here. I put in text fields for my Twitter handle, also noting that this is me recreating something. And when you select layout container, all of these are fit within a horizontal layout container. And I ran those off screen both to the left and the right because they are floating. As I said, sometimes floating objects shift just a few pixels. And so to hedge my bets a little bit, I've got blank containers on the far left and far right of that horizontal container. So everything fits in there nicely. And all of those, so within that layout container, I did some formatting so that we've got that same background color as is in the footer of the 538 view. Okay, so now we want to, let's see here. Yes. So we look back and forth to the original view, and whenever it would have been 100%, we've got A if it means the team A has won in that instance, or B if team B has won. And the way that I'm going to do that is this calculated field right here. We've got an if and only if. If the odds of the leading team winning equal 1, then I'm saying the sixth character out of the team A in the lead field, which is A or B, is going to be displayed. Or if it's not equal to 1, then I have to use all these little sections because what I've used before is a string value, so I have to wrap the whole thing in string. I have to round it and after multiplying by 100 in order to get everything above 0, and then add on as a concatenation the percentage sign. And these are all averages because, whoops, undo that. And these are all averages because because a lot of lines are repeated because of what I had to do with the data in order to draw the lines of the chart. Happy to take questions on that calculate field or anything I've been doing once we get done here. So I've got that. I go back here and choose to use that for my label shelf in place of the actual odds. Actually, let's leave the odds on the detail shelf so I can use those in tooltips later on. Now, to get it from here to there, we do need to format and get a background color that matches the original. So I'm going to go more colors, pick screen, and just click on the background of the original view. And I also need to add in all these notes. And among the notes are going to be these bars. So I'm going to right-click on my mark here. Annotations are fantastic, and a lot of people, I think, undervalue them. Generally, if you're going to put text over a single chart, it should probably almost always be an annotation instead of floating a text element. In large part because if you float a text element, you block interactivity behind that element, whereas an annotation is not going to block tooltips or selection filters in your chart for your audience. So I type in the note that's in the top right of the view right here. So both teams start with equal odds of winning. I'll make that italicized. I'll drag it where it needs to be, trying to make it a horizontal line. Oh, I also wanted to left justify that, so I double click and make that edit. And I drag it over. And I'll also drag the line over so that it doesn't overlap with my box. Now I need to format it because annotations are by default going to have some shading behind them, and I don't want that in this case. So I choose none on shading. I change the line to black. And now we've got a note very much like what we see in the original here. The other annotation we'll do is a area annotation, and this is going to say Team A's first kick. Make that whole thing bold. Oops. We'll use the color that I had from my lines already for the blue. And I'm going to drag it to roughly the space that's occupied by that line in the original view. Now in this case, we do want shading, but not quite the shading that's given to us now. So what I worked out to be the most appropriate was a black shading at 10% opacity. Again, thank you to the devs for finally labeling that opacity instead of transparency, by the way. Nice update in Tableau 10. And we have a line that's a bar that's more or less like this. You can see the grid lines behind it, but it's good enough for me. And for my next version I'll take out of the oven, I've also added in the make or miss further down the line. But as we're, what happened? Why is that showing there? Hold on. Just a moment. Okay. Oh, also, in the original we had borders around these boxes alone, but not these ones. So my annotation cheat on that would be to choose an area, just type a space, format it to have no fill and a black border, and then I'm just going to place that around my mark. Now, all of these annotations here are a bit tedious, and so we don't have time for that. So here we go back to the oven, and I have a version in which I've added in all those annotations already. So we've got all of our kick bars, we've got our notes on that occurred throughout the view. This one was a little tricky. I already had the 0 line down here, and so I made an annotation there. And then I made another blank annotation, but this one of a point that has, I'll show you the formatting, has a line and an arrow. It's not exactly what they had here, but I couldn't quite get it. You know, I think I got pretty darn close to what the original view looked like. And I hedged a little bit on that point. The other thing I did here before we went to the oven was I put in a background image. Let me show you that menu. So if you go up to Map, Background Images, you can always take a PNG or a JPEG and define where the background image is going to run. In this case, I had the image, I run the image from -5.6 to +5.6 along the x-axis, and between -0.5 and 12.25 on the y. So that way we've got our grid lines only in the places where they occur in the original view, and the only places where it's possible for such an event to happen in a penalty kick. You can't get somebody up to 0.4 without having already won a penalty kick shootout. The only other little nitpicks I do to get this to look just like the original would be to drag in and float in an image over +4 to +6. And I've got a nice little image file that's the exact color of my background. I shape it. Oops. Take away fit image so it fills the whole space there. And do the same thing on the other side. Don't fit image. Drag it in like that. Now the awkwardness of that approach is if I were to click on the axis now, I get kind of, and the end user would see this as well, I get the weird kind of reminder that I cheated that. Well, anytime you've got interactivity, whether really simple or complex, that would be distracting for your user, or in the worst cases, screw up what you're visualizing, easiest way to fix that is just to hover a blank container over that area. So I've got a blank container, move it around to cover that whole axis. And now no way will notice that I cheated a little bit to get rid of +4 and +6. And let me double check my notes, but I think that covers. Oh, one other little thing down here. Nice thing when you've got an image. So instead of text, I actually have an image of my Twitter handle here, and that allows me to set URL. And now 22 notifications. That'll be fun. And now I just paste in my Twitter or the name of my blog URL or my Tableau public archive, and folks can easily find me if they just come across this on Twitter or somewhere else. And that is that. And being a perfectionist, I feel I need to tinker with this a little bit, but happy to take questions.
Well, Steve, so far I've seen a lot of, this is impressive, and you have the fanciest oven ever.
The fanciest what?
The fanciest oven, because you keep taking things out of your oven.
Nice, nice.
Let's see. Can you please show how the +6 to even and +6 format worked again?
Yes. Let me, and also I've got a tweet I'll send out here on some notes on annotations from Tableau's knowledge base. Okay, so that's on my Twitter now. Yeah, let me bring that back. So this is, and these follow the, and this gets really, let me do it from here. Get to that formatting screen from this spot. In fact, I'll take my blank away so I can get to it. So we right click and choose Format, Numbers, Custom. Okay, so, and I'll just build it from scratch because when you click Custom, it takes away the previous. So this follows the logic by which Excel does custom number formatting as well. So if you're familiar with how to do some advanced number formatting there, do that. And also, you can always, along with Googling Tableau and description of what you want, in this case, you could just Google Excel custom number formatting and find some guides online. But in this particular case, if I click plus hashtag and I don't click anything else, it's just putting a plus in front of everything. I don't know exactly why it gets rid of the 0 and why it leaves the negative on the other side of the plus, but it does. But the general syntax of custom number formatting here is that what you type in before the first semicolon is going to be formatting only the positives. When you type in some custom formatting after the semicolon, it's going to format only the negatives. And then if you type in another semicolon and then type something in, that's what's going to be there in place of 0. But again, this is a place where Googling Excel custom number formatting would be just as effective as Googling Tableau custom number formatting. Same syntax. Check my Twitter mentions. See if there's a question in there.
I think one of the questions that, as I'm going through some of the chat, is the dual color. Somebody asked, the dual color only uses the default color palette, right? And they were wondering, they just thought it looked better because of the version 10 palette improvements. Is that right? Can you speak to that?
The color palettes where I had, so I go back to pre-oven, the one that that was my view I used to make the background image. Let's see here. Let me bring the right one up. So talking about this one in particular, is that the question?
You know what? Let's see. I'm not sure where that was in the grand scheme of things.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have
Okay.
it time stamped.
Okay. Well, I mean, just speaking of color
Steve, can you hear
palettes,
me?
yeah, yes, I can.
I was actually the one that asked that. So yeah, it's here, right? When you first create it, which you reassign them, which was awesome. But when you first create it, all the different gradients, they automatically create only off the automatic color palette, or is that, do you know? But I never thought about reassigning them the way you did. So that alone is awesome.
Yeah, and if I wanted to be even more perfectionistic with this one, I might look at it in terms of, well, Team B doesn't land in the 50% bin at all, and so if I was going to be really nitpicky on this approach, I'd probably choose to select all of these before assigning palette, and then changing this one to the darkest blue after that. But was there another question around that? Am I missing the question here?
No, that was cool. I've tried to do the dual color before, and I noticed that when I initially pick a palette, it seemed like I could only do it with the default palette. But it looks so much better when you did it, and I'm thinking that also helps with the new colors in Tableau 10.
Right. By the way, Josh, thank you for the me as Bob Ross tweet. Love it. I can put that on screen for the moment.
Okay, Steve, we have another question. Can you explain why you have used the background image instead of playing with the format borders?
Use the background image instead of playing with the format borders. Ooh, I might have overlooked something there. That might be better. Can somebody expand on what changing the format borders means in this case? Because I don't see an option to force these grid lines to stop at a certain point, but that would be better.
So I think Michael ZGUT is the one that asked the question. So Michael, if you want to follow up again, either in the chat or the Q&A window to just clarify what you're talking about, that would be great.
Yeah, and even if not, Michael, if you could reach out to me on Twitter. When the video comes out, I'll put out a blog post on my website, stathunting.com, and with the video as well as the final, I'll publish this. Since it's a Tableau 10 beta right now, I might have to wait to publish it a little bit. But yeah, I'd love if what you're implying there is possible. I would love to do it. Because the background images are a little annoying in some ways, and certainly would take more time to create the image and set the bounds of it than simply telling the grid lines to stop at a certain point within Tableau. Any other questions?
Well, Steve, I think you've gobsmacked everyone. There's been a lot of good conversation in the chat thread that I'll let you catch up on so that you can perhaps continue the conversation, which I think is just, I mean, this has been amazing. Good.
And I'm very thankful that Tableau 10 didn't crash in the middle of this. I did have a 9.3 workbook waiting in backup just in case, but glad it didn't come to that.
Yes, somebody just said that they realized that they're woefully underutilizing annotations.
Yeah, I did for a long time too, and I was always annoyed when I would float text and then we'd be blocking something, especially if you've got a dashboard that's more dynamic, and you do some filtering, and suddenly there's a mark behind where you had the text element. Another really nice aspect of notations is sometimes I'll use them on a view that's going to be dynamically changing based on filters. I kind of put it out on the outer edge to just note and give initial notes on interactivity, and then once they start to use that interactivity, the note goes away because the annotation is no longer pinned to an area that's no longer on the graph.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us on this. It's just fantastic. And yes, the recording, I know everybody has been, or some of the comments I've seen is I can't wait for the recording to come out so I can watch this over again. So the recording, just as a reminder, will be out on approximately July 25th. And of course, Steve is just always welcoming to any questions and continued conversations on this.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much.